Hi, boys and girls. It is time for social studies. Today we are reading a story called The Elves and the Shoemaker. And the reason we're learning about a shoemaker, or we're reading a story about a shoemaker, is because in colonial times, people had to make their shoes. They couldn't just go to the store and buy whatever pair of shoes they wanted. They had to make their own shoes. And so this story is about a shoemaker. All right, let's get comfy. It's going to take a few minutes to read, but try to follow along, okay? Once there was a shoemaker who had grown very poor over the course of several years. The shoemaker had been good at his trade. He made attractive shoes that fit well and made his customers happy. But unfortunately, fashions had changed over time and the shoemaker's shoes had gone out of style. People didn't want to buy them anymore. They preferred shoes that the shoemaker made in the next town made. There's the shoemaker looking out his window, waiting for customers. The shoemaker looked around his shop, which was in the front of his house. He had very few supplies left to make his new shoes. Since people had stopped buying his shoes, he wasn't making any money. And because he wasn't making any money, he wasn't able to buy new supplies. He picked up the tiny bit of leather he had left. He thought perhaps he would be able to squeak out one last pair of shoes before he closed up his shop for good and moved to the poorhouse with his wife. He carefully cut out the pieces he needed and set them on his work table. But he was too tired to work, so he yawned, kissed his wife goodnight, and went to bed. The next morning, there he is, rubbing his eyes. The next morning, he rubbed his eyes, kissed his wife good morning, and went directly to his shop to work on that last pair of shoes. When he entered his shop, he stopped short. He rubbed his eyes again. There, on his work table, where he'd left the pieces of shoe leather the night before, was a perfectly assembled pair of shoes. The shoemaker picked up a shoe. The stitching was neat and attractive. The shoe was more stylish and interesting than the shoes the shoemaker himself made. But where on earth had the shoes come from? Who had made them? The shoemaker had no idea. The shoemaker asked his wife, but she had no idea. Not knowing what else to do, the shoemaker picked up the shoes and placed them in front of his window. Just then, a gentleman walked by. He stopped at the window and peered in. He quickly opened the door and pointed to the new shoes. "I simply must have those shoes. What will you take for them?" The shoemaker shrugged and gave his normal price. The man waved his arms excitedly. No, 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 no. Those shoes are worth twice that much." He insisted that the shoemaker take double his normal price for the shoes. The shoemaker accepted the money graciously. As soon as the man walked out of the shop, the shoemaker clicked his heels, kissed his wife, and ran out the door to go to the leather shop. With the money he'd just been paid, he was able to buy enough leather for 2 new pairs of shoes. Later that day, the shoemaker cut out the pieces to make 2 new pairs of shoes. But he was tired, so he yawned, kissed his wife good night, and went to bed. In the morning, what do you think he found in the morning? In the morning, the shoemaker found 2 new pairs of shoes, just like the pair he had from the day before. The stitching on both pairs was just as neat and attractive as the stitching on the previous pair, and the style was just as interesting. He put the 2 new pairs in the front window, and pleased when 2 men walked in within minutes and offered double the normal price for 2 pairs of shoes. The shoemaker again clicked his heels, kissed his wife, and ran to the leather shop. He bought enough leather to make 4 new pairs of shoes. Again, he cut out the leather and went to bed. And in the morning, he found 4 new pairs of shoes. Again, the shoes sold quickly for double the shoemaker's normal price. And again, the shoemaker clicked his heels, kissed his wife, and ran to the leather shop to buy more leather. This went on and on and on until the shoemaker had sold so many pairs of shoes he became a very rich man. And one evening, just as he was about to kiss his wife goodnight, he suggested to her that they stay up and find out who was responsible for making all those shoes that had made them so rich. His wife thought that was a good idea, So the two of them hid in a dark corner of the shop and struggled to stay awake. About midnight, they saw two little elves enter the workshop. The elves were wearing old, worn-out clothes with holes in the elbows and knees. They went straight to the leather and began to work, stitching together shoe after shoe after shoe. When they were done, they lined the shoes up neatly into pairs and then quietly left the shop. The shoemaker and his wife were very surprised. Who would have imagined that two little elves could make such stylish shoes? The shoemaker said. Yes, said his wife, and yet they have no shoes of their own, nor do they have any decent clothes. I would like to make each of them a new set of clothes. It is the least we can do for all they have done for us. That is a nice idea, said the shoemaker. So the shoemaker's wife worked all day. She made two little shirts and two little pairs of trousers. She made two little pairs of suspenders and two little pairs of socks and two little pairs of shoes. The little shoes looked exactly like little versions of the stylish shoes that the elves had made. That night, the shoemaker and his wife laid out the new sets of clothes in place where they usually set out the shoe leather. They hid in the corner to watch how their little elf friends would react when they saw their presents. At midnight, the two elves entered the shop. They saw their new clothes and looked thrilled to pieces. They quickly put everything on and they danced together. We are two fine little gentlemen now, said one elf. Yes, we are, said the other. We are so fine that we can never think of working as shoemakers ever again. They joined arms and skipped out of the shoemaker's shop. The shoemaker and his wife never saw the elves again, but by this time they had grown very rich and never had to make shoes again, and so they lived happily ever after. Okay, boys and girls, I hope you liked the story. In your packet today, you have the same story. It's a little different. It's around Christmas time, but there's pictures of, there's the old man with the shoes, and there's a few pages of it, but there's pictures in there you can color, and you can read the story again at home. So enjoy The Elves and the Shoemaker.